right, everybody, welcome back to the deep dive.
Yes, welcome back.
So today, we are going to take a look at something that I think is super practical, especially if you're taking like high school entrepreneurship or maybe even a college business class.
Absolutely.
We're going to look at pricing strategies,
Yeah,
and we're going to be going through kind of like a unit on this.
a pricing unit.
And we've got a couple different sources. So we've got a couple of really great YouTube explainer videos on this subject.
Very helpful.
And then we also have like excerpts from a curriculum.
Right.
And we're going to be going through that curriculum and trying to give you sort of like the key takeaways from all this.
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, so our mission today is to really unpack these core concepts
Right.
of how businesses figure out how much to charge for things,
Yeah.
and, you know, really making it applicable to something that you might be learning in school or something that you might be dealing with in your everyday life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's dive in and see what we can learn.
Okay, so let's start with the definition of price.
Okay.
This is from our Leaders Talk resource.
Right.
And it says simply that price is the money exchanged between a buyer and seller for goods or services.
Yeah, that's pretty much it, right?
That's it.
A pretty basic fundamental concept.
Yeah, and it's really important because if you get the price wrong, it can really hurt your business.
Absolutely. Yeah, if the price is too high,
Nobody buys it.
no one's going to buy it. And if it's too low, you're not going to make any money.
You can't cover your expenses.
Right. You could even lose money. Exactly. So price is super key.
Yeah.
Now, this same resource, along with Unit 7, Lesson 1, talks about the marketing mix,
Okay.
which is made up of product, price, place, and promotion.
Right. Yeah, 4 Ps.
So 4 Ps, and a price is one of these elements.
Yes, a very important one.
Yes, it's all intertwined.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about pricing factors.
Right.
What goes into deciding how much to charge for something?
Right.
So Unit 7, Lesson 1 kind of breaks it down into two main categories.
Internal factors and external factors.
Right, so these are things that are happening either within the company
Inside the company.
or outside in the broader market.
Yeah. So let's start with the internal factors.
Okay, sounds good.
So one is the company's overall marketing strategy.
Right?
Like, are they trying to be like the low-cost provider, or are they trying to be like the luxury brand?
Yeah, are they like the Walmart or are they like the Apple?
Exactly. Or
Right.
are they like,
Right, somewhere in between.
right, somewhere in between? And then also the marketing mix that we just talked about.
Right, the 4-paper.
Product, price, place, promotion. So, you know, obviously the product itself is going to have a big impact on the price.
Absolutely,
And where you sell it and how you promote it are going to impact the price.
for sure.
And then, of course, there's the cost structure of the company.
Right.
How much does it actually cost to make and sell the product?
Yeah, your cost of goods sold.
And then, you know, even organizational considerations can come into play.
Right, like the size of the company.
Yeah, or like their management style.
Or, their overall philosophy.
Yeah. And then finally, the product life cycle stage.
Right.
So is this a brand new product?
It's a brand new innovation?
Or is,
Or is it something that's been around for a while?
you know, something that's been out for a while and is, you know, in decline?
Yeah, or in its maturity phase.
So all these things that are happening inside the company are going to affect the price.
Absolutely, those are all internal factors.
Now, what about external factors?
Okay, so external factors, these are things happening outside the company,
So like the market and the demand.
right? Is there a big demand for this product or is it a niche product?
And how does that demand fluctuate?
Right.
You know, is it a seasonal product?
Exactly.
Or is it something that people need year-round?
And are there any trends impacting that?
Right. Yeah.
Like, is it suddenly becoming more popular or less popular?
And then you've got the competition.
Right.
What are other companies charging for similar products?
Yeah. Are you in a very competitive market
Are you in a monopoly?
or do you have very few competitors?
And then also economic conditions.
Right.
You know, what's the overall state of the economy?
Yeah. Is the economy doing well?
Are we in a recession?
Are people feeling good about spending money?
Or are they, you know, really cutting back?
Right.
And then, believe it or not, there are legal and regulatory issues that can affect pricing.
Yeah.
Like in some industries, there might be price controls or
The ceilings
price ceiling.
or laws against price fixing.
Right, yeah, or laws against like predatory pricing.
Exactly.
And then something that's really important is customer perceptions of value.
Right.
So how do customers perceive your product?
Do they see it as good value
Do they see it as high quality?
or do they see it as cheap and low quality?
Yeah, and then also price sensitivity.
Right.
How responsive are customers to changes in price?
So if you raise the price by a little bit, will demand drop significantly
Right.
or will people still buy it?
Or will people still buy it?
That leads into the concept of price elasticity of demand.
Yeah, can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so price elasticity of demand, that's really a measure of how much the quantity demanded of a product changes in response to a change in price.
Okay.
So if a small change in price leads to a big change in the quantity demanded,
Man.
that product is said to have high price elasticity.
Okay.
So for example, luxury goods, like a designer watch,
Like a
like
Rolex.
a Rolex,
Yeah.
exactly, they tend to have high price elasticity.
Okay.
Because if the price of a Rolex suddenly went way up,
People would stop buying it.
a lot of people would say, yeah, I'm not going to buy that anymore.
Right. Yeah.
On the other hand, essential goods, like basic food items,
Milk and bread.
milk, bread, things like that,
Right.
they tend to have low price elasticity.
Okay.
Because even if the price goes up, people still need to buy them.
They still got to eat.
Exactly. So they got to eat. So the demand doesn't change that much.
So that makes sense.
So understanding price elasticity is really important for businesses.
Okay, so we talked about all these internal and external factors. Now let's look at some of the actual methods that businesses use to set prices.
Okay, that sounds good.
And one that seems pretty straightforward is what's called cost-based pricing.
Yeah, cost plus pricing.
Yeah, so this is introduced in Unit 7, Lesson 2.
Right.
And it's basically where you figure out how much it costs to produce, distribute, and sell a product, and then you add a markup to that cost to determine the selling price.
Yeah, so you're making sure you're covering your costs
Right.
and then adding a little bit on top for profit.
Yeah, so the Two Teachers video focuses on a specific type of cost-based pricing called cost plus pricing,
Right.
and they give the formula for that.
Yeah, pretty simple.
Price equals total cost plus
Total cost
total cost times markup percentage.
times the markup percentage.
Right. So, for example, they talk about the iPhone 14,
Right.
and they say if it costs Apple, let's say 400 pounds to manufacture one iPhone 14,
Okay.
and they want to make a 200-pound profit on each one,
Right.
then they would sell it for 600 pounds. So that 200-pound profit represents a 50% markup on their cost.
That's a pretty good markup.
Yeah, but I guess it's an iPhone.
It is an iPhone.
So what are the advantages of pricing things this way?
Well, one of the big advantages is that it ensures that your costs are covered.
Right.
You're going to at least break even on each sale
Yeah.
and hopefully make a profit.
Yeah, and it's pretty simple to calculate.
Yeah, if you know your costs, you just add your markup.
Yeah. So it's easy to understand and easy to implement,
Right.
but it seems a little oversimplified.
Yeah. It does have some disadvantages.
It does. What are some of the disadvantages?
One of the big ones is that it doesn't take into account market demand
Okay.
or perceived value.
Okay, so you might be pricing yourself out of the market.
Exactly. Yeah, if your costs are high
If your costs are high.
and you add a big markup,
Yeah.
you could end up with a price that's just too high for what customers are willing to pay.
So you end up with a bunch of iPhones in the warehouse.
Exactly. Or you could end up underpricing your product.
Okay.
If your costs are low and you add a small markup, you might be leaving money on the table.
Right. People might be willing to pay more.
Yeah, they might think your product is worth more than what you're charging.
Yeah. And also, it doesn't really incentivize cost efficiency.
Right.
Because if you know you can just add a markup to your costs and pass that on to the customer,
You're not really motivated to find ways to reduce your costs.
you don't have to try that hard.
Exactly.
So it's not very competitive in that sense.
It's not the most sophisticated approach.
Okay, so cost plus pricing, it's simple, it's easy to calculate,
Right.
but it does have some limitations.
Yeah, some definite drawbacks.
Okay, what about target return pricing?
Okay, so target return pricing, that's another cost-based pricing method.
Right.
But instead of just adding a markup to cover your costs,
Yeah.
you're setting your price to achieve a specific return on investment.
RO.
ROI, or return on sale.
RS. Okay, so for example, if you want to earn a 20% return on your investment,
Okay.
you would figure out what price you need to charge to achieve that.
Yeah, so you're working backwards from your profit goal.
Okay, so what's the formula for that?
Well, the formula for return on sales is
Okay.
price equals total cost divided by 1 minus desired return on sales.
Okay, so if you plug in your numbers,
You can figure out what price you need to charge
you can get your target price.
to hit your profit goal.
Okay. But this also seems like it could be a little problematic.
Yeah, it does have some limitations as well.
So what are some of the limitations of target return pricing?
Well, it's similar to cost plus pricing in that it doesn't really consider market demand or competition.
Okay.
You could set a price that achieves your target return.
Yeah.
But if it's too high compared to your competitors,
No one's going to...
or if customers don't perceive the value,
Yeah,
you're not going to sell enough to actually hit that target.
right.
And it also relies heavily on accurate sales forecasting.
Yeah, if you're, a brand new business,
And you don't have a lot of historical data to go on.
you might not be able to predict your sales very accurately.
And that can throw off your whole pricing strategy.
Okay, so we've talked about cost-based pricing methods,
Right.
which are a good starting point,
It can be.
but they don't tell the whole story.
No, they don't.
Now let's shift gears and talk about market demand and pricing.
All right.
So this is where we get into the whole supply and demand thing.
Right, the law of demand.
Yeah, which basically states that as the price of a product increases,
The quantity demanded decreases.
yeah, and vice versa.
Right.
So if something goes on sale,
People are more likely to buy it.
people are going to stock up.
Exactly.
Right. And this brings us back to the concept of price elasticity of demand,
Right.
which we talked about earlier.
Which is really important for optimal pricing.
Yeah. So what is optimal pricing?
So optimal pricing is about finding that sweet spot where you balance the price and the quantity demanded
Okay.
to maximize your revenue or profit.
Okay, so it's not just about charging the highest price possible,
No, not necessarily.
because that might actually lead to fewer sales
Right.
and less profit overall.
You might sell a few units at a high price, but you might make more money selling a lot of units at a slightly lower price.
Right.
So it's about finding that balance.
Okay, so that's market demand and pricing.
Right.
Now, what about competition-based pricing?
Okay, so competition-based pricing, that's where you set your prices based on what your competitors are charging.
Yeah, you're looking at the market
Yeah, you're looking at the going rate.
and saying, okay, I'm going to charge around that.
Yeah.
So some examples of this are like Walmart.
Right.
They're always trying to have everyday low prices.
Everyday low price.
And they're constantly monitoring their competitors' prices to make sure
Yeah.
they're staying competitive.
Yeah, they want to be the low price leader.
Yeah. And then there's like Coca-Cola and Pepsi.
Right.
They tend to price their products very similarly.
Yeah, they're always kind of matching each other.
Right. Yeah. So why would a business choose to use competition-based pricing?
Well, it could be a good strategy in markets where prices are very transparent
Okay.
and customers are very price sensitive.
So like commodity.
Like commodity.
Yeah, or like gasoline.
Gas, yeah.
Yeah, where, you can just drive across the street and get it cheaper.
Right, exactly.
So if you don't match the competition,
You're going to lose customers.
you're going to lose customers.
Yeah,
But it also has some drawbacks.
it does.
What are the drawbacks of competition-based pricing?
Well, one of the main drawbacks is that it doesn't really allow you to differentiate your product based on value.
Okay.
So if you're just matching your competitors' prices, you're not really communicating to customers why your product might be better or different.
And it can also lead to price wars,
Yes, absolutely.
where everyone is constantly undercutting each other.
And that can erode everyone's profits.
Right. And no one wins.
Yeah, it's a race to the bottom.
Yeah. So competition-based pricing, it can be a good option in certain situations.
Right.
But it's not always the best approach.
It's not a magic bullet.
Okay, now let's talk about value-based pricing.
All right.
So this is where you set your prices based on the perceived value that your product or service offers to customers, rather than just focusing on your costs or what your competitors are doing.
Yeah. So you're really thinking about what your customers are willing to pay.
Yeah, and what they value.
Exactly.
So one example of this is value-added pricing, where
Right.
you offer additional features or benefits
Or services.
or services that justify a higher price.
Yeah, you're giving customers more,
Yeah, you're going above and beyond.
and they're willing to pay for it.
And then there's price skimming,
Right.
which is where you set a high price for a new product.
A new innovative product.
Yeah, and then gradually lower the price over time as the product becomes more widely available.
And its competitors enter the market.
Yeah, so for example, like the iPhone,
Right.
when a new iPhone comes out,
It's very expensive.
it's super expensive.
Yeah, but then over time,
The price comes down,
the price comes down as new models are released.
and they need to clear out the old inventory.
Exactly.
Okay, now let's talk about psychological pricing.
All right.
This is where it gets a little bit sneaky.
A little bit manipulative.
Yeah, but it's also very effective.
If it can be.
So the first type of psychological pricing that we're going to talk about is odd-even pricing.
Also known as charm pricing.
Yeah, where you price things at like $19.99.
Instead $10 or
Right.
$20.
Right.
Yeah, so you're ending the price in an odd number
Yeah.
to make it seem lower.
Why does that work?
Well, our brains tend to focus on the leftmost digit.
Okay.
So we see 19.99
Yeah.
and we think, oh, that's basically $19,
Right.
even though it's really just a penny away from $20.
It's like a mental trick.
It is a mental trick.
And it works.
It does work.
Okay, and then there's prestige pricing,
Right.
where you set a high price to signal exclusivity and luxury.
So this is for products where
High price equals high quality.
exactly like luxury cars or designer handbags,
Yeah, where the price itself is part of the appeal.
part of the brand.
Okay, and then there are reference prices, and framing.
Right.
So this is where you present a price in a way that makes it seem more appealing.
Yeah. So, for example, you might show a discount off an original price.
50% off.
Yeah, 50% off.
Or you might say,
Or you might emphasize the price per unit.
like $1 a day
Yeah, $1 a day.
instead of $30 a month.
It sounds much better,
It sounds way better.
even though it's the same amount.
Yeah, so it's all about how you frame it.
Right. Framing is everything.
And then there's anchor pricing,
Okay.
which is where you display a higher original price next to a lower sale price.
To make the discount seem bigger.
Right.
Yeah. So you might see something that's normally $100
Yeah.
marked down to $50.
Yeah,
And you think, wow, that's a great deal.
right.
Even though it might have never actually been sold for $100.
Yeah.
They're just using that higher price as an anchor to make the sale price seem more attractive.
Yeah.
That's sneaky.
It's very sneaky.
But it works.
And then what about buy one, get one free offers?
Go.
BOGO. Yeah.
Yeah, those are a classic psychological pricing tactic.
They make you feel like you're getting a great deal.
Right.
But sometimes they can be a little bit misleading.
Yeah. Sometimes the original price might have been inflated just to make the BOGO offer seem more attractive.
Like they raise the price before they put it on sale.
Exactly.
And then they give you the second one free.
Yeah,
So you think you're getting a great deal, but really you're just paying the regular price for two.
you might be.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's move on to price adjustments.
All right.
So once a business has set its initial prices,
Right.
they often need to make adjustments.
Over time.
Yeah, based on various factors.
The market conditions.
Yeah, or like seasonality.
Or competition.
Or competition, or...
Inventory levels.
Yeah, they have too much stuff.
They need to get rid of.
So one common type of price adjustment is discounts and promotions.
Right.
So this can be like percentage off discounts,
Yeah, like 20% off.
or limited time offers,
Limited time only.
or seasonal sales.
Yeah, Black Friday sales.
Back to school sales.
Right.
And these can be really effective at boosting short-term sales.
Absolutely.
But you have to be careful not to overdo it.
Right.
Because if you're constantly offering discounts,
Customers might start to expect them.
yeah, and they'll just wait for the next sale.
And it can also devalue your brand.
Make it seem like it's not worth full price.
Exactly.
And then there's dynamic pricing,
Yeah, also known as surge pricing.
which we've all experienced with Uber and Lyft.
Yes, especially during peak times.
Yeah, when the price goes way up.
Yeah, when the demand is high.
Yeah. So dynamic pricing is where you adjust your prices in real time based on various factors.
Like demand and supply.
Yeah, and competitor prices.
And even things like weather.
Yeah, or like events.
Right, if there's a big concert in town.
Hotels are going to be more expensive,
Exactly.
right? And it's becoming increasingly popular,
Yeah.
especially with the rise of e-commerce.
Right, because it's so easy to change prices online.
And it allows businesses to maximize their revenue.
Yeah.
But it can also be controversial,
Yeah.
especially if customers feel like they're being taken advantage of,
Especially for essential goods.
like groceries or medicine.
Where people really need them.
Yeah, they don't have a lot of choice.
And they might not be able to wait for the price to go down.
Right, so it's a delicate balance.
It is.
And then there's loss leader pricing,
Okay.
which is where you sell a product at a loss
Below cost.
to attract customers into your store.
Yeah. Hoping they'll buy other more profitable items.
So the classic example is like a grocery store selling milk below cost
Right.
to get people in the door.
And then they'll buy other groceries.
Yeah, and they'll hopefully buy enough other stuff.
To make up for the loss on the milk.
Yeah, so
Well,
it's a way to drive traffic and increase overall sales. Okay, and then the last thing we're going to talk about is bundling.
Right.
So this is where you sell two or more products or services together
For single price.
for a single price.
Yeah.
And this price is usually lower than the total price.
If you bought each item separately.
Yeah, so for example, like Microsoft Office,
Right.
you can buy Word, Excel, and PowerPoint all together
In one package.
in one package for a lower price than if you bought them individually.
Yeah. And it's often more convenient for customers.
Yeah.
To just buy the bundle.
Yeah, and it can also be more profitable for businesses
Right.
because it can increase the average order value.
And reduce transaction costs.
And the Marginal Revolution University video gives a really interesting example of why bundling can increase profits.
Yeah. They talk about Word and Excel.
Right.
And how bundling them together
Yeah.
can actually lead to more profit.
Than selling them separately.
Even if some people only want one or the other.
Right.
It's because bundling reduces the variability in demand.
Of-
So you can price closer to the mean
Yeah.
and capture more consumer surpluses.
Okay, so it's all about smoothing out those peaks and valleys in demand.
Exactly.
Okay. And then they also talk about why cable TV companies bundle channels together.
Right.
And they say it's because people have different viewing preferences.
So some people might really want ESPN,
Yeah.
and some people might really want the Food Network.
Yeah.
But by bundling them all together,
They create a more stable demand.
right, because even if some people don't watch certain channels,
Other people do.
other people do, so it all kind of balances out.
And it also makes it easier for them to negotiate with content providers.
Right, they can say, look, we have all these subscribers.
Yeah.
We want to offer your channel as part of our bundle.
And they have more bargaining power.
Exactly.
Okay. And finally, the Marginal Revolution University video makes a prediction about the future of music.
Yeah, they say that music bundling,
Like Spotify.
like Spotify,
Yeah, is likely to win over individual song sales,
like iTunes.
like iTunes. And why is that?
Well, they say it's because of both the price discrimination benefits
Okay.
and the significantly lower transaction costs
Okay.
for bundled services compared to micropayments for individual songs.
So it's just easier and cheaper for people to subscribe to Spotify
Yes.
than to buy individual songs on iTunes.
Right.
And it's also more profitable for Spotify.
Because they can capture more consumer surplus.
Okay, so that's bundling.
Right.
Now let's just briefly mention unbundling, which
Okay.
is the opposite of bundling.
Yeah, you're selling things separately.
You're selling things separately
all together.
instead of together.
Yeah,
And then there's mixed bundling.
where you offer both options.
Both bundled and unbundled.
Right.
So you can buy the package or you can buy individual items.
Yeah, so you give customers more flexibility.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have
We've talked about cost-based pricing,
rice.
value-based pricing, competition-based pricing, psychological price adjustments, bundling and unbundling.
Yeah, that's a lot
It's a lot.
to think about.
And the key takeaway is that there's no one right way to price.
Exactly.
It depends on a lot of different factors.
On your business, your customers, your market.
Yeah, your goals,
Yeah.
your industry.
Yeah.
So as a future entrepreneur,
Or even just as a consumer,
yeah.
it's important to be aware of these different pricing strategies.
So you can make informed decisions,
Yeah.
whether you're setting prices for your own products or services,
Or deciding whether to buy something.
or trying to figure out why something costs what it does.
Exactly.
So the next time you're at the store,
Or browsing online.
think about the pricing strategies that might be at play.
And how they're influencing your decisions.
Yeah, and see if you can spot any of the tactics that we've talked about today.
I bet you'll be surprised.
You'll start to see pricing everywhere.
Yeah, it's all around us.
It's a whole new world.
It is.
Okay, so that's it for today's deep dive on pricing strategies.
Hope you learned something.
I know I did.
I did too.
Thanks for listening. Yeah.